priorities if you're elected. You have 1 minute.
I just wanted to say the thing that really grows our economy, as an economist with 35 years of experience and an educator, is really investing in education, investing in research and development, and investing in our infrastructure. So as the representative for this district, those are the things that I will focus on in terms of growing the local economy. And we have to focus on those small businesses that don't have access to legions of lobbyists to push their agenda in Congress. So I will be here for small and medium-sized businesses and middle and lower income families, as well as those people who are at the top. But we must focus on the bulk of the community that actually needs our support.
Michael Manley.
The next question is for Tom Rice. For Tom Rice, how would you say, Tom, how would you say you most differ from your opponent, Gloria? And why would you say that makes you the better choice for the 7th Congressional District? You've got 1 minute also.
Well, I think Mrs. Tinubu has stated repeatedly that she identifies very closely with President Obama and his administration, and they've pursued a policy of a bigger government and bigger regulation. And I think that dampens American competitiveness. See, the world has shrunk, and we're not just competing with businesses in other districts. We're not competing with businesses in other states. We have to compete worldwide. And when we have the highest corporate tax rate in the world, it makes our businesses less competitive. When we pile on regulation after regulation, it makes our businesses less competitive. When we have laws like Dodd-Frank that take away capital through small banks, when we have laws like the regulations under EPA that force the closure of our coal plant here in Conway and the one in Darlington, and loss of immediate jobs, but it also drives up the cost of energy, drives up the cost of manufacturing. More American jobs go overseas. When we have things like Obamacare and 10,000 new pages of regulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Tinubu, you're asking for rebuttal on,
Do we have opportunity to rebut?
on what point, ma'am?
On the point that he made about what
I'll give you 30
this
seconds.
is his last issue. You know, we hear this conversation about government being too big. You know, it's only too big when it's taking care of children and seniors and people who are in poverty and small businesses, according to Mr. Rice. It's not big enough when it comes to supporting special interests and friends who are engaging in local economic activity. So I think that we have to make that distinction.
If you like, Mr. Rice, we try and do equal time.
I absolutely believe that we have to have a social safety net. I absolutely believe that we have to make in concrete our promises that we've made to our seniors under Social Security, under Medicare, and under Medicaid. But what I don't believe is that we need to pile on more and more regulations on our businesses that make them less competitive, because then they can't create jobs. And that is, you know, we used to be called industrious. We're not industrious anymore. We're actually, what we're doing is we're handicapping our businesses. We're making them less competitive worldwide. We've sat here for decades and we've watched millions of American jobs go overseas. It's time to stop it. It's time for our government to get off the backs of business, let them get back to work, promote entrepreneurship, and bring American jobs back to America.
Thank you. Round two of our questioning will begin right after this break. Fast hour in television, and every one of those 5-second breaks is going to eat into your candidate's time. So be judicious, if you would. This is a 1.5-minute break, so we got about a minute back. And Michael, we start with you. Welcome back. In this round, we'll focus on the economy and jobs, with the candidates having 1 minute to respond to questions. Michael.
And the first question is for Gloria Tinubu. Gloria, parts of the PD, of course, have the highest unemployment rate in the entire state. Without Interstate 73, they're hard-pressed to attract new industries and higher-paying jobs. How would you work to bring jobs to our rural areas which have seen such a rural plant decline and closings in the past decade? Yes. What would you work to really hit jobs in the PD?
Yes. There's a myth that Mr. Rice perpetuates, and a lot of local economic development folks do the same, and that is that the real job creation occurs when there are no regulations on businesses and businesses get to do exactly what they want to do. But we know that 75% of the economic growth that we've seen in our economy is from training and education and from the knowledge industry. So we know that we have to provide a first-class, a world-class educational and training system for all of our citizens, from pre-K through college. That's how we grow jobs. And the other thing is we make sure that we invest in infrastructure, invest in sewer systems, in libraries, in public transportation that will generate more jobs than investing in simply just new infrastructure. If we invest in the public transportation, we'll create really nearly 20% more jobs than we would create if we created a new system. But the idea is we have to look at all of the options first before investing billions of dollars.
Thank you.
I'd like to rebut if I could.
Tom, I have a question for you. What specifically might you do to bring jobs?
Can I rebut that?
The question is
I think you can
directly
probably
to the same point.
Yeah, the question is the same essentially. What would you do to bring those jobs to the PD, and how might your plan differ from Gloria's?
Well, nationally, there's a national level to this and there's a local level to this. Nationally, we've got the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Businesses are going to operate where they can, where they can make a profit. They've got to compete worldwide. And if we kneecap them with higher taxes, they can't stay in business competing with their competitors worldwide. Also regulation. All this stuff has consequences. When we cut off businesses' capital with laws like Dodd-Frank, when we drive up the cost of energy by taking away our low-cost fuel source in coal, when we drive up the cost of doing business with things like Obamacare, our businesses cannot compete worldwide, and we should not be surprised when they go overseas. Locally, what I propose to do, and what I've said throughout this campaign, is I want to put an experienced economic developer on my campaign staff, somebody who will help us come up with a great plan, and I will be the #1 salesman for this district. I will do everything I can to attract good, high-paying jobs to this district, just like I have as chairman of Horry County Council.
Tim, next question, please.
I'm sure I don't have to tell the two of you, but the 7th Congressional District is a large district. It's made up of a lot of different cities and a lot of different types of businesses. But the economic engine of the Grand Strand, of course, is tourism. What would you do to bolster the tourism industry as a freshman member of Congress? And we'll start off with you, Mr. Rice.
Well, I think I-73 is the biggest infrastructure need in this district. I think it's, we have 14 million people driving in here every year. 90% come by car, 75% come off the I-95 corridor. It's just amazing to me that the road hadn't been built already. Depending on who you listen to, we're either the #3 tourist destination or the #5 tourist destination in the country. We desperately need that road, and it's going to happen one day when a hurricane rolls in, and we've got to get the 800,000 people that are on the coast off. So that's the biggest infrastructure project we have. That's the biggest thing I think we can do to bolster tourism in this area.
Mr. Tinubu, the same question for you. What would you do to bolster tourism?
Well, this district, is, as you said, is very diverse, and it has a whole host of issues. 7 out of the 8 counties are persistently poor. So we have to go beyond Horry County. We have to go beyond just the tourism area. We have to look at what will need to be in place in order for the other areas to grow as well. And we must invest in education. We are ranked at the very bottom when it comes to education and training. We're actually ranked at the very bottom when it comes to business development and job creation. So even though we've had these same policies over the last 20, 40 years, we've continued to be at the very bottom of everything that is good and at the top of everything that is bad. So we must change our policies and focus on local residents, what is best for them, and training them, giving them a high quality education, and then investing in our local businesses that are loyal to us, not chasing after these businesses that are competing with all the other counties and cities in our district. Really invest in the businesses that are creating jobs and have supported our local communities.
Thank you. Michael.
Tom Rice, you've come out as a supporter of dredging the Georgetown port. What specific actions might you take as a freshman congressman to make that happen?
Well, again, I think earmarks are gone. I think that any project, there's limited money for infrastructure, but that doesn't mean the federal government is not going to be investing in infrastructure. Of course they will. We're going to have to keep our infrastructure up, and we're going to have to build new infrastructure, or we'll fall behind the rest of the world. We won't be able to compete. And obviously, ports are a critical part of that. How can we allow our ports to close and compete worldwide? So the dredging of the Georgetown port is a fairly low cost, relatively low cost, and I think it will have a great benefit. What I'd love to be able to do is to be able to argue the merits of that and prove to my colleagues in Congress that that project has merit. And in response to what Mrs. Tinubu said earlier, I totally agree that we need to keep up our investment in education. I wouldn't do anything to cut that. But what I'm more concerned about is making sure that the people have jobs once they graduate. 50% of college graduates are either unemployed or underemployed. That is a far more important current pursuit. It is abominable. It's a shameful statistic. I have 3 sons who have just graduated from college. One just moved to Chicago to find a good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Gloria, kind of getting back to the topic a little bit, your thoughts on dredging the Georgetown port?
But before I say that, I want to say Mr. Rice said that he will hire an economic development expert. When you vote for me and elect me, you will have an economic development expert. Going to the issue of dredging the Georgetown port is absolutely critical that we do that. I would hope to serve on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee of the House of Representatives. In addition to that, I really believe that we have to put in place a national policy for looking at all of our ports and making sure that we're not competing in South Carolina, Georgetown against Charleston for resources. We need to make sure that we are clear about our national interests, and having ports is a part of that in order to create our competitive edge that we need. One of the deficits that we really talk about is the trade deficit, and that's clearly connected to the accessibility of our ports. So I'm in support of it and would work to put in place a national agenda as your new Congresswoman.
Thank you. When we come back, we'll have our lightning round of quick questions and quick answers. Welcome back to the South Carolina 7th Congressional District primary debate. No, we're not the primary. This is the real thing. Before we begin this round of questions, we'd like to thank Brad Dean and the Myrtle Beach Area Chamber of Commerce, and also Mike Wooten with the Grand Strand Business Alliance for sponsoring the debate. Now, this is our lightning round where we'd like to get your quick responses on a number of hot-button issues. No rebuttals in this round. Let me kick it off. As South Carolina's economy moves, and we certainly hope it does, it's certainly going to be moving into a more sophisticated manufacturing, technological base. Do you see, Mr. Rice, any need in that environment for a greater acceptance of unions in these businesses?
No, I do not. You know, South Carolina has been quite successful in attracting high-paying technical jobs across the state. If you look at BMW, if you look at Boeing, if you look at Continental, if you look at Goodyear, if you look at Amazon, and you can go on and on and on. And these jobs came here because we are a right-to-work state. That's why we got those jobs. And I think
Ms. Tanubu, wait, this is the quick one. Ms. Tanubu, this is the economy between unions and right to work.
South Carolina has been a right-to-work state since 1954, and it's continued to be at the bottom of every economic indicator that's positive. There's no correlation between being a right-to-work state and creating positive job results. I mean, Mr. Wright makes up these stories that we're supposed to believe, but they're not true. The data shows that states that have right to work laws tend to have lower wages. We may create jobs, but what are the quality of those jobs? People are continuing to stay below the poverty line. There's a place for unions. If they work for unions, we would not have the workplace issues that we have today.
Tim.
A lot of people out of work now, unfortunately, and a lot of those people staying out of work even longer. Quick answers. Would you extend unemployment benefits, Ms. Tanubu?
Yes.
Mr. Rice?
No, I wouldn't, but what I would look to do is to add a work requirement to get unemployment benefits. I think that it's wrong to encourage and continue a dependency culture.
Michael.
Many viewers in this 8-county district are merchants themselves. They feel there is over-regulation by the federal government. What, if any, regulations would you like to see changed or abolished? Tom Rice.
In the course of campaigning, I go in businesses across this district, and there's one question I always ask. I say, do you see the government as an entity that facilitates your business or an entity that is an obstacle that you have to get across? And it's normally about that time that the top of their head blows off. And I wonder how we got here. What a shameful thing that is. We used to be industrious. The government has got to get its foot off business' neck and let them create jobs, let them expand, and we'll be prosperous again.
Thank you. We're going to take another break. We'll be right back.
good, Tom?
You're doing great, Gloria!
We're back with the regular 1-minute questions in this round. Tim, you've got the first one.
Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, businesses with pools are now required to have permanent pool lifts installed. Yet some local businesses say portable pool lifts are safer, more cost-efficient, and more effective. And as you know, we have several hotels and rental properties in the 7th District which have to comply with these new regulations. Do you support this type of legislation? Ms. Tinubu.
Certainly it's important for us as a government to make sure that people who have particular challenges would have access to public as well as private facilities. Of course, there has to be a balance between making something excessive. I believe that this is something that can be adjusted in a way that will benefit both those hotels as well as the people who use them. But to say that all regulations are just bad, we shouldn't impose regulations, it's just doesn't make sense. We saw what deregulation did to the financial industry when Glass-Steagall was repealed, and we were on a financial cliff because of that. So if there's reasonable regulation, and I believe that this is probably one that could have some tweaking.
Mr. Rice, same question. Do you support the legislation?
No, I don't. I think that obviously I support people who are handicapped having access to facilities, public or private, but it has to be reasonable, and to require a fixed mechanical lift for every body of water, no matter the size, is another example of ridiculous federal overreach. You know, one size does not fit all. So no, I do not support that legislation.
We'd like to give each of you a chance to ask the other candidate a question. I think you knew this was coming, and the opportunity is all yours, starting with Ms. Tinubu.
Mr. Rice, you talk quite often about anti-government and government not having a role to really play in the private sector, that the private sector are job creators, and the narrative goes on and on. Yes, yet you are leading an effort that they have dubbed Project Blue, that puts at risk nearly $25 to $30 million of public dollars with very questionable outcomes. How do you justify that project that's conveniently being put on hold until after the election, November 13th? But even your friends on the council have said this is bad business, it's not good for the taxpayers, it's leaving them with a burden that is not necessary. How do you jive the two? How do you jive your talk about the government, anti-government, and then you're imposing government? You're really selecting a winner in this case, in the case of call centers.
I don't think the government can create jobs. I think the private sector creates jobs, but I think the government can create a fertile field for job creation. Now, with respect to Project Blue, you know, I made sure from the very beginning that there were protections in there for the taxpayers, and that no taxpayer dollars would be invested unless and until the bank's money was on the line, the developer's money was on the line, the landowner, and the building was built, the equipment was in there, and 400 employees were in place. And unless and until all those dominoes come into place, no taxpayer money will ever be at risk. And I'd rather not talk about the deals that might not go through. Let's talk about the ones that have gone through. You know, when I ran for chairman of county council, I ran to create jobs. And we created a revitalized economic development corporation, and we have tripled job production in Horry County in a year and a half, and I am very proud of that. And I want to bring that same effort to the entire district. Thank you.
And now the tables are turned. Your question for Ms. Tinubu.
Ms. Tinubu, given your pro-labor union stance and the fact that to attract jobs, we have to have a competitive environment, what is your specific plan to bring jobs to this country and this district?
Thank you for the question. We know that jobs and productivity are really connected to education and training. And I've said that in a knowledge economy, it's absolutely ridiculous for us not to invest in our children and in their future. We tell them to go to school, get a college education, and then there are no jobs for them to get. So one of the things that we must do is do that, train them. Science, technology, engineering, and math, the STEM areas, we must focus on that because those are really the jobs of the future. In addition to that, we must make sure that we have the infrastructure necessary for local economic development to occur. In my little town of Plantersville, the majority of the residents are still not connected to the public sewer system. That is unconscionable. So we must invest in infrastructure, and we must provide research and development for small businesses who don't have access to the resources that larger businesses have access to. Those are the ingredients for economic growth and job creation.
Thank you both. Good questions. You'll put us out of business over here. We're going to take another break. In this section, I have several questions on national and foreign issues, and again, 1-minute answers. If you're really substantively challenged, we'll go to rebuttal. But I mean, there's always lots of time to go back and forth, but time moves rapidly. Let me ask you, after last night's debate, and I want to start with you, Mr. Rice, after last night's debate, how comfortable are you with Mitt Romney heading the Republican ticket? Does he help you or hurt you?
I'm very comfortable with Mr. Romney heading the Republican ticket. I believe he believes in smaller government and American entrepreneurship. And with respect to foreign policy, I think that we really don't have a foreign policy right now. And I think that what you see happening in Benghazi and around the world is a result of lack of American leadership. I think America needs to lead. I think people look to us to lead, and I think we have a real lack of leadership today.
Conversely, Ms. Tinubu, does President Obama help or hurt your campaign, and why?
One of the things that I believe occurred last night is a really demarcation between the two philosophies about our economy and what is in the best interest of our citizens. I believe that the president believes in economics as I understand it, and that is the management of our resources for the long-term benefit of all. And I believe that Mr. Romney believes in this thing that we call crimatistics, which is the manipulation of property and wealth for short-term profit. And those aren't the same things. He might understand crimatistics, but he really does not understand economics, as Aristotle first coined the term. So we've got to talk about well-being of all members of our society and not just a select few.
I'd like to rebut that if I could.
Yes, 30 seconds, Mr. Rice.
I'd like to rebut.
I guess if Mr. Romney's attacked, you're attacked. So 30 seconds, please.
Well, the management of our assets for the benefit of all sounds a lot like socialism to me. I don't believe in socialism. America is called the land of opportunity, and what we need to guarantee here is opportunity. We don't guarantee outcome. You know, capitalism is the best incubator for innovation that has ever been. It has made this the greatest country that has ever existed on earth. And why we would want to go away from that is beyond belief. Thank you.
Mr. Newbold, you get your 30 seconds too.
Aren't you really tired of that phrase, socialism? Let's be a little bit more creative than that. Can we be a little bit more creative than that? You know, this is absurd. You know, we're talking about public policy. Government is a social enterprise. It's us coming together as society saying there are things that we have to do together that we can't do by ourselves. Mr. Rice is okay with government as long as it supports him and enriches himself and his friends.
Thank you.
But when it comes to seniors and our children, all of a sudden it's socialism. Seriously?
Thank you.
Seriously.
Again, a question I want to ask each of you, starting with Mr. Rice. Health care has been one of the central issues of the presidential campaign. If you're elected to Congress, would you vote to abolish, and the issue comes up, would you vote to abolish all or part of the Affordable Health Care Act? And if so, what would you propose in its place?
I absolutely would vote to repeal Obamacare. I mean, there are a couple of things that are good about Obamacare, one being the pre-existing condition, one being the fact that you can keep your kids covered till they're 26 years old. You know, there are certain aspects of it I like, but how could it be a good thing for government to run our health care? How could it be a good thing for government to make our health care decisions for us? That needs to be between a doctor and a patient. There are a lot of proposals out there, one put out by Tom Price that's with respect, you know, what we need to do is get more people insured. I agree with that. I agree with that. But does that mean the government needs to take over health care? Absolutely not. There are a lot of people who are upset that Horry County runs the trash dump. The trash dump. But yet we think the federal government should make our health care decisions for us? Again, a dramatic overreach. 10,000 new pages of regulations, 10,000 new IRS agents, more cost to our business, makes American business less competitive, more American jobs go overseas.
Thank you. Mr. Newbold, I assume you'd like to keep Affordable Health Care Act. What else would you do? What else would you do on behalf of your constituents?
Not only would I keep it, I believe that, you know, there are some things that we've determined as a society as best provided through collective mechanisms. Our infrastructure, highways, bridges, we've determined that our health is one of those categories. And to make it such that people have to go bankrupt in order to deal with an illness or a catastrophic situation is unconscionable to me. And I believe that we can do as other 21st century countries are doing, provide affordable public health to all citizens of this country and do it in a way that doesn't bankrupt them. Healthcare is one of the highest and fastest growing costs that everyday working families have to face. Mr. Rice knows this, and to say that about this district that is persistently poor, where people are health challenged, suffering from high blood pressure, cardiovascular diseases, shortening of their life expectancy, low birth rate, that says to me that you really is questionable about your interest in terms of the citizens of this district.
Mr. Rice, you've been challenged in that segment. If you'd like it, I'll give you 30 seconds to respond.
Well, absolutely. I think that we need to make health insurance affordable, make medical care more affordable, and there are ways to do that. One is to increase competition between insurance providers. Let them compete across state lines. One is to allow uninsured people who are either self-employed or unemployed and therefore can't get on an employer plan to join as a group sponsored by the federal government, but let them get private health insurance. Let them own their own health insurance plan, so when people leave an employer and go to another employer, that they don't lose their coverage. There are a lot of ways to do this short of the federal government nationalizing our health care system.
Thank you.
It is private.
These segments go by too quickly. We'll be right back. Welcome back. More big picture questions in this segment. Tim, it's your turn.
With the U.S. national debt at over $16 trillion, what specific actions do you support to reduce our national debt? And would that include raising taxes? Ms. Tinubu.
One of the things that we should not have done, and I would support us not doing this in the future, is engage in multiple wars that are not paid for. That's what we saw under the previous administration, which increased our debt, coupled with the reduction of revenues in terms of lowering taxes. There's no way that we could not have not had a debt because of the way that the policies were implemented. One of the things that we can do is to really separate our capital expenditures from our current expenditures so that we're comparing the right things. Most industrial countries do that. Most businesses do that. Most states do that. They separate their capital expenditures from their current everyday expenditures so that we can finance those capital expenditures using the right kind of debt instrument, and then use our revenues to fund our current expenditures. That's one of the things that we can do that will get us talking the same thing and not continue to have this unsolvable debate that we're currently having.
Thank you.
Mr. Rice, what would you do? What actions would you support to reduce debt, and would it include raising taxes?
Well, she's talking about an accounting trick. She's not talking about any solution to the deficit problem. I think that to solve our deficit problem, it's so large, people don't realize how big it is. You know, under the 3.5 years President Obama's been in office, our debt's grown by more than any administration in history. There's only one way to solve it. I think, you know, with entitlements being at $1.9 trillion a year, the interest on the debt being at $300 billion a year, that's $2.2 trillion. Well, today, we're only taking in $2.1 trillion. So that puts us at a deficit before you spend one dime on any other federal program, to include things like defense, before you buy the first bullet, to include things like infrastructure, before you build the first road, before you spend any money on the Department of the Interior, or the State Department, or the FBI, or the CIA, or the White House. That's how bad the problem is. And you're not going to solve it just with raising taxes. You're not going to solve it just with cutting spending. It's going to require an overall overhaul of the tax system, of the spending caps, and it's going to require entitlement reform.
Thank you. Michael.
A recent report has come out that said Social Security, as we know it, will run dry, gone by 2033. Tom, in 1 minute, what would you do to prevent that?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
A report has come out that suggested Social Security, as we know it, those benefits to all the Grand Strand retirees and PD retirees, is gone by 2033. If that's the reality, what would you do to prevent that from happening?
Well, you know, that's one problem, but I'm even more afraid of Medicare being bankrupt in 2024, 12 years from now. I mean, we've got huge problems with entitlements. With respect to Social Security, you know, we can fix that with some tweaks. We don't have to affect anybody who's already retired or anybody who's even close to retirement. But for those who are younger than 55, you know, there may have to be some delay in retirement. There may have to be some means testing. I'm not talking about dramatic things, but gradual increases over decades will make our Social Security program solvent. This is a promise we've made to our seniors. And we've got to get used to living up to our promises. We've got to make it concrete, and we can do it. And it can be relatively painless.
Gloria, how do you fix Social Security?
Well, let me just go back to a comment Mr. Rice made earlier about an accounting trick. I'm very surprised, Mr. Rice, that as a tax lawyer, that you would say that separating capital expenditures from everyday current expenditure is an accounting trick. I am terribly amazed by that. Tell those corporations that do it every day. Tell the state and local governments that do that every day. To go back to Social Security. And Medicare. Mr. Rice supports the Ryan budget, which totally changes how we deliver Social Security and Medicare as we know it. That's what he says. He totally supports it. We must make sure that we preserve both of those institutions, which isn't socialized or socialism, but it is public investment in people who have invested into a system that they're now retired, and they deserve our care. So I will work very hard to make sure that the resources are there to protect them.
Pardon? Mr. Rice, I'd like to give you 30 seconds.
Put words in my mouth. I'm not specifically tied to the Ryan plan. I'm not specifically tied to Bowles-Simpson. What I am saying is it's going to require some sort of all-encompassing plan. And I haven't heard any plan out of the administration or Ms. Tinubu at all. And they're telling you Medicare is going to go bankrupt in 12 years. What's your plan?
You're the tax accountant. You're the tax lawyer. Do I get to respond to that?
You're rapidly losing your closing statement.
Okay, well, I don't want to lose my closing statement.
All right.
I'll reserve.
We'll be right back. Can we do one before closing, or do we go closing? We're going to go right to closing statements. And they have to stay within 1 minute. You're hearing me. And remind me who goes first. Ms. Tinubu, I believe. So many questions, so little time. We're going to go right to closing statements. You have 1 tight minute, Ms. Tinubu.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you this evening. Thank you for coming out. I entered this race because I am committed to restoring the American dream for all of us. Our children, our seniors, people in rural communities, people in urban communities. I believe in that. I realized the American dream as a daughter of a farmer and a maid who worked right here in Myrtle Beach. We must do the things that we need to make sure that dream is available to all of us. Investing in education, investing in full employment, investing in infrastructure, and making sure that people have access to affordable health care. I'm an economist, an applied economist who's trained to really understand and solve real life problems. I also have a master's degree in agricultural economics. I'm asking you to vote for me. You won't have to hire another economist. I will be your economist. I will serve you and the people of the 7th District. Thank you for this opportunity, and God bless you.
Mr. Rice, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you to everybody who put this on. People, I grew up right here in the 7th District. I was raised by a single mom, school teacher at the Air Force Base. I raised my family here. I worship here. I built my business here, representing people right here in the Grand Strand in the PD. You have a really stark choice here, a really big difference, a chasm between us, a clear choice. You can choose between higher taxes or more economic freedom. You can choose between more big government and regulation, or you can choose between more jobs. You can choose between big government or more freedom. This is a critical election. The future of the country is at stake. I'm Tom Rice, and I'm asking you for the honor of your vote.
And that's the last word for tonight. But you, the voters of South Carolina's 7th Congressional District, have the last word in less than 3 weeks. On behalf of our sponsors, the Myrtle Beach Area Chamber of Commerce and the Grand Strand Business Alliance, our thanks to both candidates for joining us this evening. Thank you to Tim McGinnis and Michael Maley. The election is November 6th. Make your voice be heard. I'm Charles Bierbaud. Thanks for being here.
Is this hot? This is hot. Hey, if anybody wants to stick around and listen, we're going to be taking care of
This is Carolina This Week. Carolina This Week with Tim McGinnis.
Welcome to this special edition. Welcome to this special edition of Carolina This Week. We are post-debate right now. We just watched the debate between Republican Tom Rice and Democrat Gloria Tinubu. I have an esteemed panel of gentlemen here to talk to me a little bit about the debate tonight. Representative Terry Alexander, a Democrat from Florence. Charles Bierbauer, the Dean of the Journalism School at the University of South Carolina. Of course, you might recognize him from CNN as well. And former Lieutenant Governor Andre Bauer, who ran for this office, who ran against Tom Rice in the primary. Thanks for being with me tonight, guys. I want to start off with you, Charles. We had the best seats in the House tonight, I think. What struck you about tonight's debate?
Well, my view of debates...
You're on.
Well, good. That's good to know. You'd think in our business we'd know when we were on. My view of debates is it's the best opportunity that voters have to see the candidates face to face in some kind of spontaneous, even though the questions are not necessarily the things that they would like to hear, but they have to be able to respond to each other. And that's the only way we see them is in this setting.
And I really feel like tonight we talked a lot about big government versus small government. That seemed to be the message from at least Mr. Rice when he was talking to Ms. Tinubu, and Ms. Tinubu back to Mr. Rice.
Well, Democrats would disagree with you that it's all about big government, but Republicans certainly take the view that government is too big, and that's very thematic. There was also a very strong emphasis on what we need to do to acquire jobs in this district and more broadly in South Carolina, and Ms. Tinubu's continued emphasis on education. I'm an educator. I'm certainly sympathetic to that, but I also think that we have to look at job pictures across a broad spectrum.
I want to start off with Representative Terry Alexander, because I imagine, other than Charles, he had to drive the furthest to get here tonight, all the way from Florence. Were you happy with what you heard tonight?
I was very impressed with Ms. Tinubu and her efforts and how she presented her case and how she presented her cause. I thought she had a compelling argument about how we ought to serve this district and how we ought to represent those individuals who are under the margin, the least of these, who are more, who needs the government, or whatever you call it, big or large government, who needs the government to as a safety net for those who are impaired or in part or just need their assistance there, basically.
I know one thing she talked about a lot tonight was an emphasis on education. You're in the PD, you're in one of the toughest hit areas as far as this employment crisis is. What do you feel? What needs to be done from Washington to help bring jobs back to your area?
Well, coming off of county council for 16 years, I found out that there's a direct correlation between education and economic development. Most economic developers, first of all, the first thing they look at is how's your educational system, not only in your particular community, but throughout the state. So there is a direct correlation between economics and education. If your educational system, if your educational level is not up to par, you're not going to get businesses and developers to come to your community. So if we want to expand businesses, if we want to grow businesses, then we must, there's a must in terms of us dealing with our public education, our private education, or whatever the case might be. We got to do a better job in educating the workforce, and that's what's most important. Businesses are looking at the workforce and what's important to them, and if they don't have the workforce here in South Carolina, they're not coming.
Andre Bauer, what were your impressions of tonight's debate?
I actually was shocked. I've actually debated with both of them, and neither one of them changed their talking points at all. Neither one of them got more moderate. Usually after a primary, both candidates will get more moderate. You see that presidential candidates right now. Both of them are exactly where they were in March. I thought both of them would reach out and try to pull some of the other ones' votes, which would be a good way to try to pick up votes and say, hey, you know, I'm more moderate, I'm not as hardline or Democrat as maybe my presidential candidate. And then the Republican would say, look, you know, we're going to have to reach out and make sure we take care of seniors a little bit more and talk a little bit more about education. I didn't see that at all. I saw hard lines on both sides digging in and really not trying to expand the base. And I think that favors Mr. Rice because this is a Republican district.
I've got to agree with you. Having interviewed both Ms. Tinubu and Mr. Rice since the primary, I was expecting to see that same shift toward the middle like we see in presidential politics, and yeah, you sure didn't see it. They stuck to their guns.
Well, I have to disagree that. I think Ms. Tinubu did shift it a little bit. She did talk about the totality of the district. She wasn't hard line on her side in terms of, you know, the Democratic perspective. She was looking at it more of a regional perspective and what's good for this particular district. Not what's good for the Democratic Party or what's bad for the Republican Party, but what's good for the district and what we need to do in terms of making this district grow. I see her expanding her whole philosophy, if you will, in that regards.
I want to talk about just a couple things that struck me tonight. And Charles, I know we kind of had a tough time hearing up there from where we sat because we're kind of behind the speakers a bit. But I remember a very big applause when they talked about the economic development expert. That was one of the first big applause points of the evening, and that came from Ms. Tinubu after Mr. Rice talked about hiring an economic development expert to come in to help bring jobs. But this does seem to touch off on exactly what I think is probably the biggest issue that is affecting the Grand Strand and PD right now, and that is jobs. As a Republican, Mr. Bauer, were you happy with what you heard about bringing jobs to the Grand Strand and PD?
In this debate, I never heard specifics. I heard the same talking points that I've heard from both parties for a long time. And I think there's a lot of people looking for nuggets that say, how are you going to do it? You say you're going to lower taxes on one side. On the other side, you say you're going to improve education. There's no specifics whatsoever. And of course, 30-second answers tend to make it difficult to get those nuggets, but I really didn't see a whole lot of information here that's changed at all. It was very general topics, very general answers that say, we got to protect Social Security. Didn't say how. You asked questions directly, and the questions were not answered. They went off on what they wanted to answer, and probably should have been pushed a little harder to specifically answer questions that they'd answer around.
Let me say something in terms of when you're talking about government and government providing jobs in Florence County in particularly, and I wish that this debate would come to Florence. I wish that these candidates would somehow have a debate in Florence. But in Florence in particular, with our economic development coalition, we have government and private entities working together. Government put in their share, private industries put in their share. And while the economy was flattering across the state, the PD, and particularly Florence County, was growing businesses. We were announcing businesses after businesses because of the relationship that government and the private sector had in common. So there is a working relationship. There is a responsibility. There is a place for government in terms of creating jobs, particularly in terms of creating those jobs and making sure that the policies at the local level are available to those individual businesses that are coming out. If you bring government and the private sector together, there is a working relationship that exists and that will happen because it is happening in the Florence County.
I want to continue my conversation with Mr. Bauer and with Representative Alexander, but I want to leave the last word in this segment with Mr. Bierbauer, who has a drive back to Columbia to make. Your final thoughts on tonight, sir?
Well, I think that's the point. I don't live in this district. I live in a different congressional district, and what intrigues me and what I think the concern of this district has to be is it indeed going to craft itself as essentially a coastal county district centered on Myrtle Beach and Horry County, or is it going to address the questions of the PD? And whoever is congressman here, whoever is elected is going to be the person who starts to build that position. I still see a dichotomy. I see a divide from what I hear in the conversation. And in your conversation, the representation has to address all, 700,000 or so people who live in a congressional district. I think that's going to be a challenge for whoever is elected here. And then I recognize that there are other districts that are even more spread out or strung out along highways. Congressman Wilson's district goes all the way down into Beaufort, or at least it used to. So we're not unfamiliar with those. But here's an opportunity and a challenge in the 7th Congressional District to decide what this district is going to be about.
Charles, thank you for coming down. Thank you for moderating. It hopefully went a little bit better than that Republican primary we had, where I thought we were going to have to give you Kevlar to get out of here. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Carolina This Week.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Without it, the best you can hope for is mediocrity. For WPDE News Channel 15's First Alert Weather Team, our passion is weather. keeping the Grand Strand and PD informed with unrivaled accuracy and without the hype. It's our purpose, our spirit. It's the core of who we are. Anyone can read the weather, but it takes passion to keep your family safe with accurate weather coverage. The Grand Strand and PD regions are as diverse as the people who live here. And for WPDE News Channel 15, our mission is to always provide the region's most trusted news coverage, going everywhere and anywhere, keeping you connected. It's our purpose. It's our spirit. It's the core of who we are. Because news never stops, and neither do we. Passion. Without it, the best you can hope for is mediocrity. For WPDE News Channel 15, our passion is local sports. Keeping the Grand Strand and PD informed with unrivaled local sports coverage. It's our purpose, our spirit. It's the core of who we are. Others say they cover sports, but it takes passion to cover local sports.
Welcome back to Carolina This Week. This is a post-debate episode of Carolina This Week. Joining me are State Representative Terry Alexander, representing parts of Florence, former Lieutenant Governor Andre Bauer, current businessman in the community, and speaking of businessmen, we got the king of the businessmen, the president of the Myrtle Beach Area Chamber of Commerce, Brad Dean, joining us now. And the Myrtle Beach Area Chamber of Commerce, along with the Grand Strand Business Alliance, sponsored tonight's event. And I want to ask you, from your perspective, do you think business owners heard what they needed to hear from the candidates tonight to make a decision?
I'll tell you, if you didn't hear what you need to hear tonight, I don't know what you could possibly hear. It's clearly two candidates with different views of the role of federal government, different views of where we are and where we're going. And I think tonight made it much easier for all the voters, businesses and otherwise, to make that decision come November 6th.
Andre, back to you, because you expressed a little dissatisfaction from what you heard tonight. A lot of the candidates maybe not answering the questions the way you thought they should answer them. Now, I asked you to come on here as a Republican. You do still support your Republican candidate, don't you?
Absolutely. And I told you in my answer that I think the debate favored Mr. Rice, clearly because this is a Republican district and he was talking about Republican issues. Had I been Mr. Tinubu, I would have been being more moderate. Tom hit more marks because he's hitting what the voters of this district want to hear.
And this is a tough district, though, because we think of the 7th District as just being, I think sometimes we get a little local-centric from where we live, but this is more than just Horry County and Georgetown County and the Grand Strand and tourism. This is Florence, and this is the PD, and these are some areas that have really been hit hard by unemployment.
Absolutely right. This district consists of 8 additional counties. You're talking about Darlington, Florence, Marlboro, Chesterfield, Dillon, all of those areas which are high in unemployment status in this state. And if the emphasis is going to be on Horry County, I wonder what type of representative that we're going to have if he or she only looks at Horry County as the mecca of the 7th Congressional District. I think Tinubu spread it out, saying, look, if we are going to be the person that represents this district, we're going to have to look at the total district, not just one segment of the population, because whoever is elected, and I'm hoping and praying that it is Tinubu, whoever is elected, that person needs to be able to represent everybody, and he or she must take a moderate position and not just, just be on the side of that, whether it's on the far right or the far left, because there's a bunch of people in the middle that deserve the services, of the government, that deserve the services of public education, that deserve the services of private practices, of private industries in this area. So that person, whoever that person needs to be concerned about those who are on the margin. And if you're going to look at just the Republican base, and I understand Brother Rice has to do what he needs to do, but he's going to have to represent the total district. And I almost can assure you, if this debate was held in Florence, the tenor would be different. The tenor would be different because of the demographics, because of the location, and all of that. And I'm hoping that somewhere between now and Election Day that we have this debate in Florence, or have a debate in Florence, where the population differs a little bit, where the demographics differs a little bit. So therefore, you have a different audience that he or she has to speak to.
I want to talk about I-73 because that was one of the questions to the candidates tonight. I-73, I know from a Grand Strand perspective, will bring people to the Grand Strand to spend their money and be tourists, but it will also provide a lifeline out of Horry County in case a hurricane comes. And some say for the PD that I-73 will bring jobs as it's built and the corridor that it creates. Did you like what you heard? And this goes to whoever wants to put the mic up to their mouth first. Did you like what you heard about I-73 tonight?
Well, I think Representative Alexander makes a great point. This is a district that's more than just the Grand Strand. And one thing we know that will serve the entire district is Interstate 73. It's going to bring 29,000 jobs. A lot of those jobs are in the PD. And I think that's what you heard Tom Rice say tonight is we've got to build that. And that's not just a connection for tourists. That's not just a connection for new industry and higher paying jobs. That's going to save lives in the event of a hurricane. And I think tonight what the real question on that is, what is it the opponents don't like? More jobs, more tourists, or saving lives in the event of a hurricane?
Andre, you
ought to be running for office.
You ran for this seat. You had to answer the I-73 question several times. What did you think about what you heard about I-73 and how it jives with how you feel?
Again, I think if you ask most folks in this district, they see the benefit of 73. I don't think that's a big debate anymore. The debate is, how does our representative, as a freshman legislator, go to Washington and get it done? I don't think that most of them, I don't think either one, if you press them on the issue, say I'm against it. The question is, effectively, can you really make it happen? And that's the debate. We've both been freshman legislators in a minority. I've actually been in the minority and the majority.
Right.
And how do you go up there, and there's going to be a majority in Washington, this Republican, Tom would have an advantage to getting this done. There's absolutely no question. But the question is, which one can be the best person to go up there and make it happen?
Well, not only that, the question becomes, if Brother Rice seems to think that no government intervention is necessary, we don't want the federal government involving in our local politics, he won't get it done. If you think that the federal government is intrusive, and I think Ms. Tanuba made it very clearly, we want federal government intervention when it benefits us. But when it's not beneficial to us, then we don't want government intervention. Now, and the only way he's going to get this interstate built is government intervention. And Rice is supportive of that. But when you remove 77, then government is too invasive, they're too intrusive. And you can't have it both ways. And that's what I heard from Mr. Rice today. I want it when it works for me, but then when it's not working for me, then I don't want government intervention involved. And that's when he talked about health care, when he talked about all those things that the Republican Party opposes. But when it comes to the real deal, you gotta have government intervention. You gotta have government dollars to make this thing work.
Just like the real debate, guys, I wish I had a lot more time to talk about this with you because this is a great panel. Maybe I'll get you coming to the studio sometime. Yeah? Maybe.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Okay. Stay with us. We will be right back. Kate and Dawson's going to sit down with me for a minute. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
You
guys are pros, man.
Thank you for coming down.
man.
Not like you two haven't done that.
Let me know.
Okay.
Man, good to see you, man.
Now you're calling Tom Rice brother, right? I can see already. We brought everybody together.
Trying to bring them together, man. Trying to bring them together.
Thank you. Thank you.
Trying to bring them around.
Take all the mics.
Good to see you, man.
You did fine.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have 6 minutes left. Oh, you gave me that 2 over there.
Yeah, I gave you 2. That's when we had 2.
Oh.
When you were rapping, we actually still had 1 minute left.
So we've got 6 minutes. Okay. Yeah, don't worry about how time's getting out. I just need to make sure we hit 22. Yeah, I think so. Unless there's anybody else out here wants to do that. Yeah, let's get rid of. Now, one of us doesn't need to be sitting in the big chair. Right. Got it.
Let me get out of here.
How about just these two? Will go right.
What we want to touch? Did CNN and MSNBC this morning?
Yeah.
That was all on the national. Which number mic you got?
What's that?
What number mic you got? WS1 and 2. Testing.
W1, W2. We'll talk about the whole thing, the whole shebang. We can go broader.
And do debates matter? Yeah. Matter because the audience who watched tonight. You want to get this thing going? Credibility of the anchors here.
Yeah.
The audience that did listen and debates have mattered. They mattered to the president. This one will matter. It'll move numbers. And it was substantive because it was a very professional debate. I do debates all over the country, and this one was pretty substantial.
Welcome back to Carolina this week. Joining me now is Caton Dawson. He helped put some of this together tonight. He's also a former chair of the South Carolina Republican Party. Lots and lots of different titles you've had over the years. I want to talk to you. We were just talking, I don't know, maybe people may have heard some of us, but do debates really matter anymore?
Well, in modern history, remember the first debate was Richard Nixon and Jack Kennedy on television, and then there was a big long spread, and then you had Ronald Reagan and certainly Jimmy Carter. Those debates mattered, and this debate tonight will matter. The social media that surrounds it, the fact that we had two excellent TV hosts and you and Michael Maley on responsible, and the voters were watching it. And the issues matter, and what politicians say matters. And you saw a big difference tonight, and I don't want to get into all of that, but I will tell you, it was a tremendous public service tonight for people in this congressional district, which certainly there's a presidential race running ahead of this, but I commend you, the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Association, everybody involved, and certainly a full audience here tonight of concerned citizens that one thing they have in common is they're all Americans.
You know, I wasn't around for that first televised debate between Kennedy and Nixon back in 1960, but one thing that I've heard about it, that history remembers it as, Nixon lost the debate because he had poor body language. And if you go back and look at the tapes, you see a sweating, nervous, fidgety Nixon and a young John F. Kennedy. And I want to add, and not necessarily for tonight's debate, but debates in general, they really kind of get won maybe not so much on substance anymore as on body language.
And style points.
Right.
Well, last night was a classic example. Certainly the president.
And last night, by the way, this is going to be airing on Sunday morning, too,
right.
so I want people to know the presidential debate last night.
The presidential debate last night, certainly the president didn't have that high hurdle to go jump, and so he changed his style and his substance. And I will give the edge to him in the debate last night, but Governor Romney held his own. But debates matter more now, and they really did in South Carolina. In the Myrtle Beach debate is where Newt Gingrich won the South Carolina primary. He had a debate here that distinguished himself from the other candidates, and it wasn't so much the audience that night, it was the surrounding social media and the things that covered it. And that's what will happen with this debate tonight. It'll be what's covered on Sunday when you have your show on Sunday, and we're having it now. But I think the substance matters, and the questions that you asked were monumental questions that people in this district wanted to hear the answers, and I think they saw the difference tonight.
I think with Newt Gingrich, too, one of the things that pushed him over in South Carolina was his grassroots support here, and he got in here, and he did a whole heck of a lot of work. And you watch politics. Have we seen, what is the status, do you think, right now of grassroots in South Carolina?
Well, I think that certainly this is a Republican state, but it's not as Republican as everybody thinks. In a general election, we win by about 62 to 68,000 votes out of 1.2 or 1.4 million cast in a statewide election. In a presidential election, President Romney's going to win this probably north of 12 points. Newt Gingrich was, John McCain was about 9.5% over President Obama, and he had a tremendous organization here. But you're not seeing the presidential race here. I'm in North Carolina working, and you cannot buy a television ad in North Carolina right now. So when you're looking at these contests right now, that's why these debates matter locally, because we're informing the citizens, and overall debates matter now because of what surrounds it after the debate is over.
Last impressions of tonight, you've watched lots of debates. You saw both of our primary debates here. We were talking earlier about how both candidates didn't really seem to go to the middle. Did anybody need to go to the middle in this debate? Did the two candidates do what they were supposed to do as candidates tonight? From my viewpoint, looked like they did.
I think they represented the positions of their parties, because when you have a brand new congressional district, one of only 12 in the country, about 7 are going to go to Republicans, the others are going to go to Democrats, is the way we have it tagged now. But they are tied to the presidential race. And what you're seeing in South Carolina now is very little activity from the president campaigning. Governor Romney's been here, campaigned here, and you're looking at the philosophy. The president's team has a math problem here. We've got gas prices that have increased 100%. It was $1.86 in South Carolina the day it was inaugurated. College education's gone up 25%. We have 46 million people on food stamps, and the federal deficit has increased 51% under his watch to $16 trillion. He has a math problem here that the citizens are going to see. And that's going to be the defining moment at the top of the ticket of why Governor Romney is going to do so well in South Carolina, because he has offered a different plan to move America forward.
Well, now I'm going to have to go out next week and get somebody to talk about the other side.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. Well, I appreciate it. And thank you for your station and everybody there in this public service y'all provided tonight. It is a tremendous asset for the community, and I commend y'all for doing this.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We will be right back.
Thank you, guys.
we have the lights and the microphone? Hey, can we get the power back for just 30 seconds? All we want. So do I. Just cue me when we're ready. It's been adventures and live shots tonight.
Behind this.
Talk. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Just be quick. 30 seconds.
They're going to take my chair from me before I'm...
That'll be fun to get. Hey, by the way, this battery's about to die, so. Oh no. Just don't let it go. 10 seconds.
That's going to do it for Carolina this week. We are at the Myrtle Beach High School Auditorium. We want to thank Myrtle Beach High School for letting us use their facilities to do this tonight. Hope to see you back here next Sunday morning for more Carolina This Week.